Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Jeannot Szwarc's movie Jaws 2. So this is, of course, the second part of the Jaws franchise, and as I had said in my video about Steven Spielberg's Jaws, this is one of my favorite movies. Jaws 2 is not as good as Jaws. You might be shocked to learn that a sequel has not. The sequel to a masterpiece has not lived up to the quality of that original masterpiece, but here we go. So, it's actually not, I don't think it's a bad film. I think it very much tries to recreate the problem of the original Jaws movie, right? Because in the original Jaws movie, the problem is you have this community that very much requires tourism dollars in order to survive. That tourism is threatened by the presence of a rogue great white shark that is killing tourists. And the community, personified by Mayor Larry Vaughn, is unwilling to accept or confront that reality. In Jaws 2, the same basic thing happens. We're back on Amity Island. Sheriff Martin Brody is our protagonist. We don't get Quint, who, of course, had died in the first movie. And we don't get Matt Hooper, who's aboard a research vessel and not available. I think probably Richard Dreyfuss's career was starting to really take off, and doing a sequel to Jaws was not sufficiently worth his time and effort artistically at that stage. But we have Martin Brody back, played by Roy Scheider. He is convinced fairly early on that there is another shark that has returned because there's a series of deaths. And this is actually one of the things I don't like about the film. I don't like it about the storyline more than about the... There was nothing Szwarc could have done about this because of the way the movie was written. We actually know for a fact, once again, as we did in the original Jaws, that there is a shark in the waters of Amity Island. Because very early on, we see it attack and kill some people. So we know that Brody is right. We know that Larry Vaughn and Len Peterson, who seems to be this sort of skeevy 70s type land developer who's trying to bring in some new citizens to Amity Island, we know that they are wrong when they say there's no shark, it's not an issue, we're not going to worry about it or deal with it or address this in any way. I don't really care for that aspect of it, in fact. And I'll circle back to that because I want to go through generally what happens in the film first. So some various people get attacked, get killed, etc., but there's nothing really conclusive. Brody is convinced that there is a shark. Vaughn and Peterson are convinced, or at least convinced themselves, that there is not. Very well. So things go along. Brody starts basically freaking out in public and fires his gun off on a public beach at a school of fish, at which point he is relieved of duty. But the other storyline that we're following is his son Michael, who loves sailing. And Michael wants to go out and sail, and Martin Brody's like, no, sharks, don't do it. You're not allowed. Although he doesn't articulate that fear of sharks, almost certainly his very public freakout would have tipped off his son that that's what his dad was concerned about. So Michael is beached. He's not allowed to go out on his boat. He does anyway. Breaks the rule. Goes out. A bunch of kids go out sailing. Teenagers go out sailing. get attacked by this shark. I'm going to call this shark Bernie, by the way, because in the second instance that we see of this shark attacking someone, this woman douses the shark and her boat and herself with gasoline and then fires off a flare, lighting herself, the boat, and the shark's face on fire. So the shark is all crispy up in the facial area. So that goes on. So Bernie starts attacking this group of teenagers out sailing, kills a few of them, etc., etc. Brody finds out that his son Mike has gone out sailing, and he goes after them. He commandeers the police boat, to which he has no actual legal right at this stage because he's been fired from his job as chief of police. And he goes out, despite his hatred of boats and not really knowing how to steer the boat, he goes out to go and find these kids. He also calls in the coastal rescue helicopter to try and go and find them. Kids' boats get all jacked up. Bernie basically just ruins them. And they are basically stranded on this sort of floating mass of partially destroyed, partially crashed into one another boats, being picked off slowly by Bernie. Brody eventually gets out there, and they are sort of drifting toward this place called Cable Island, which is the sort of electrical power station for the island, I guess. At one point, the rescue helicopter does actually find them, and he lands in the water, because it's a sea copter, I guess. I don't know what the proper term is. And he throws them a line. He's going to tow them to Cable Junction is what it's called. Sorry. He's going to tow them to Cable Junction, but the whirring of his propellers attracts Bernie, who decides he's going to sink this rescue patrol helicopter, which honestly I'm skeptical about. I'm not an expert on sharks, as you may or may not know, but I think it's fairly unlikely that a shark is going to see a rescue helicopter and be like, that seems like a good thing for me to eat. But the kids need to not be rescued, so that's how that's achieved. So they are in the sort of final climactic moments, and Bernie is coming after. Bernie has slammed into this raft and knocked most of the kids to the water. Most of them have swum to Cable Junction, but there is Martin Brody's younger son, Sean, who tagged along, basically blackmailed Michael into taking him, along with this other girl who's still on this, called a raft, I guess. Brody has now gotten there, and he basically starts whacking this heavy power cable with the oar of this inflatable raft, because he's been told that sharks are attracted to rhythmic vibrations. And so he draws this shark in, the shark bites down on this power cable and basically just electrocuted, explodes into fire. Double fire for Bernie. Bad day for him. Bad couple of days, realistically, but you know what I mean. So, what this movie attempts to do basically is reproduce the formula of the original Jaws. There is a shark that is killing people. It is a problem that needs to be dealt with. City officials are refusing to deal with it. Martin Brody is the lone voice of reason, without Matt Hooper there in this case. The stakes for this one feel lower throughout much of the movie because in the original movie, you have a number of townspeople, not just Larry Vaughn, saying, we need these tourism dollars. If the island is shut down, if the beaches are closed, we will not be able to sustain ourselves. And so it is very much the community is under an economic threat that has to be balanced against the threat posed by the shark itself. In this one, it seems like the primary economic beneficiary is going to be Len Peterson, whom we're immediately meant to dislike because he seems to be checking out Brody's wife, who happens to work as his assistant. And her name is Ellen. So Len Peterson seems to be ogling his assistant, Ellen Brody. She does not seem interested in Peterson, but that does not make it acceptable or positive in any way. So we're meant to dislike him. And he is this sort of skeevy, as I said, 70s land developer type guy. And so the economic stakes for the life of the community seem much lower here. The stakes do get somewhat higher when it's a bunch of teenagers who are threatened. The stakes would feel higher if it was children, but it seems less sort of believable to have a bunch of 9-year-olds out boating by themselves far out into the ocean. So, but nonetheless, they are children of a sort, and so many of us have a sort of emotional reaction to children being put in peril. I think the thing that I most don't like about the movie is actually that we know basically from the beginning that there is a shark. I would rather we did not know, because that would make the whole first portion of the movie prior to when Michael and the rest of them go out sailing much more interesting in my view. Because then we would have to be asking ourselves, is Brody right? Or are Vaughn and Peterson right that Brody has become obsessed and is overreacting? Right? So if we don't know for sure that there's a shark, we have to assess that. Is this Brody's obsession clouding his judgment? Or is this another, realistically, incredibly unlikely instance of a great white shark setting up shop at Amity Island, right? What is the truth? What is more likely and what is supported better by the evidence? If we also, as viewers, had to make that assessment for ourselves in the way that the people in the movie do, I actually think that would be much more interesting. There would be much higher tension throughout the first portion. And the thing is, I think one of the things that cuts the tension in the first portion of the movie is, A, that we know, well, a couple of things cut the tension. A, we know that there's a shark. We know that Brody's right, so there's no question about that. B, we've seen this formula before. In Spielberg's Jaws, the original film, right? We know that there's a shark. Town officials are not doing anything about it for economic reasons. Eventually, Brody will have to take the situation into hand. We know that formula. We know exactly what to expect. And so there isn't much tension there. There isn't much that we need to question in order to fully understand what's going on. And I think that's a huge weakness of the movie, actually. That attempt to reproduce the formula of the original film actually makes this film, for me, much less successful